I didn't choose revenge the way some men choose a sport to pass the time or a new suit to fit a season. Revenge chose me by process of elimination, when everything dignified I had left to offer was taken, repurposed, and handed back to me as humiliation. If there's a lesson here, it isn't about catching cheaters. It's about gravity. You can pretend you're immune to it, that devotion will suspend you above the ground, that vows and paperwork can trap a fall midair. But there is a point where the floor wins. And when you hit that point, you either stay broken or you become deliberate. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I married a woman I loved enough to become a verb for cooking, driving, lifting, arguing with insurance on hold for an hour while the rudest music in creation played at me. Her name was Elena. I met her at a mutual friend's rooftop party that I only went to because I'd promised to start saying yes to things after a year of saying no to everything. She stood with one ankle crossed over the other, holding a glass in both hands like she was balancing a secret between them. I asked if the secret was mine. She laughed, and the laugh had a crack in it that made it sound like honesty. We were good together in a way that didn't need much translation. We liked the same late movies. We hated the same kind of performative conversation. She worked as a project coordinator at a nonprofit that stretched donors' dollars as far as they could go. And she came home smelling like paper and office air and said the most unrepeatable, funny things about bad meetings under her breath. I wrote software and could afford the kind of apartment where you can close the door on the kitchen and let bread rise without the whole place smelling like a bakery. She never wanted kids. I didn't either. We didn't announce it or defend it. We just lived that way and put our energy into traveling and buying good groceries and taking care of the stupid little plants on our windowsill as if they were going to reward us with more than oxygen. We married at the courthouse on a Thursday with 2 friends as witnesses because I had to ship a feature by Friday and she didn't want a dress that cost more than a used car. The judge mispronounced my last name and we corrected him, and then, for a second, there was silence, like we'd stepped into a soundproof box and made a promise to only each other with no audience. We went to a diner afterward and split a plate of pancakes at 2 in the afternoon and called it a honeymoon. I still have the creased receipt where the server wrote "Congrats" and drew a heart that looked like it had survived something. 2 years in, the words "everyone fears" suddenly moved into the center of our living room and sat down. Breast cancer. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the doctor's office called and asked if she was sitting down, and we were, ironically, standing in the kitchen because people don't sit when they're told to sit, they resist. The next month became a calendar with a different kind of ink. I learned acronyms I wish I didn't know. We met surgeons with measured voices. We met nurses whose kindness made my throat feel sore. We met fear in the elevator. We met narrowing hallways at 4 in the morning where everything smelled like hand sanitizer and something electrical. I became useful. Some people collapse into the terrible poetry of grief. Some of us become lists. I made spreadsheets. I filed claims. I called the insurer with the calm of a slow knife. I cooked foods that didn't offend her stomach. I shaved my head the night she cut her hair before it fell out, because even though my hair was never going to be the point, I understood that the mirror needed to look like solidarity. I learned to insert a PICC line as if I'd been trained. I slept in chairs. I carried bags. I washed the good pajamas and then bought more good pajamas because there didn't need to be a day when laundry decided something for us that we could decide for ourselves. I've heard men say they didn't recognize their wives during treatment. I recognized Elena in the way a person recognizes a religion they were raised in. The rituals change, but the eyes keep a shape. She got colder, yes, and sharper, and the laugh that had cracked like honesty before now cracked like glass sometimes. But she put her chin up and endured. We were a team, and we were something even more honest. A unit where I had become too small and we had taken on the weight it's supposed to have. The first time I knew there was someone else wasn't a cinematic moment with lipstick on a shirt or a text that said something stupid like, "Last night was amazing," face blowing a kiss. It was a whisper I wasn't supposed to hear. Elena was in the bedroom, speaking low into her phone, and I walked to the doorway, not to eavesdrop but to ask if she wanted tea. I heard very clearly the words, "He went to get the meds. I have 10 minutes. Then, a tone in her voice, the same edges I hear in my own when I'm arranging truths for work instead of home. I stepped back like a man avoiding a moving car without making a show of it. I made the tea and put honey in it and walked in, and she looked surprised, not guilty, and said, "You're sweet," with a softness that landed between us like a piece of furniture from a house we didn't live in. I told myself paranoia is another form of grief. I told myself not to make myself the center of a disease that was trying to own every calendar in our day. I eased off the thought. I went back to lists. The second time, I didn't get to pretend. She was showering, and her phone lit up on the sink with the name D. I had never seen a D in her contacts before. I didn't touch the phone. I tilted my head to read the preview without violating the thin line of principle I was still clinging to. It said, "Same time? Miss your voice. You can hear the word miss a dozen ways." This one had heat in it. I stepped away, sat on the closed toilet, and watched my knees go white around the edges. I didn't confront her. When you do a thing for a living where details matter more than volume, you learn that a good question asked with too little evidence is just a grenade that hurts everyone without building anything. Instead, I lived with it. I watched. I counted minutes when she said she was with her mother, and her mother texted me a photo of her cat and said, "Haven't seen E all week. How is she?" I inhaled the air between her and her phone when it lit up and she turned its screen side down. I noticed the way her voice changed when she said, "You okay?" After I came in from the pharmacy, like she was testing the perimeter for alarms. The third time, I lost deniability. Her chemo sessions were set on Wednesdays. That Wednesday, I had a last-minute meeting moved and told her I could drive her instead of ride-sharing. She smiled too brightly and said her friend from work was going to go and keep her company, that I should take a break, go to the gym, go anywhere. She was sitting on the bed folding a sweatshirt with a care that suggested she was folding time. I asked which friend. She said Daria, who I knew lived 40 minutes away and had a toddler. I nodded as if nodding were a sentence. I left the room. I put on my shoes. I went to the hospital anyway, but not to the infusion suite. I sat in the lobby with a book and watched the elevator. She didn't come down. My phone pinged with a text. "All good." Daria brought crossword puzzles. I texted back a heart. Then I went out to the parking structure and sat in the car, and because some part of me wanted to prove myself wrong in a measurable way, I opened my laptop and logged into the locate service connected to our shared phone plan. I watched her dot move. It was not on the hospital campus. It was 3 blocks away, in a boutique hotel with a name that sounded like it was trying too hard to be a noun. I stared at the map for a full minute and told myself the map was wrong. Then I watched it update. Room level accuracy is a lie. Street level isn't. The elevator in my chest went down a floor I didn't know the building had. I closed the laptop and started the car and then turned it off. I sat until my wrists stopped shaking. Then I drove slow like a person respecting speed limits could change physics. The hotel lobby smelled like flowers and disinfectant. The woman at the desk looked at me like a type. A man with a purpose and a face he couldn't afford to let move. I took the elevator without asking for anything. I stepped out on the floor the dot had suggested and listened. 2 doors down. A laugh I knew came out from under a door like steam. It wasn't the laugh from the rooftop party. It wasn't the cracked glass laugh of chemo. It was a laugh I had not been given. Not in years. It was the laugh she saved. I stood there too long. I took a step forward without a plan. Then I took a step back with a plan beginning to sketch itself, fueled by a rage so cold it felt like clarity. I didn't knock. I didn't turn this into a scene where my dignity would be another casualty. I walked away and swallowed the sound of my own footsteps so I could hear whether the world was going to stop. Didn't. The elevator was empty. The street was the same. A bus went by with an ad that made a promise about dental insurance. I sat in my car until my face arranged itself into something that could pass as normal. Then I drove to the hospital and found a couch and texted her. "How are you feeling?" She replied, "Tired." Halfway through. "Thanks for checking on me, Redheart." I replied, "Always." I had a name now, D. And a place, a hotel. If I had gone full detective, I could have broken everything wide open in an afternoon. But I don't like broken things I can't build something with. I needed more than a fight. I needed a structure that would turn momentum into consequence. That starts with patience. At home, I cooked her soup and held the bowl and blew on the spoon because her mouth hurt. She said I was an angel with a smile that had no visible cracks. I counted the number of times she touched my arm with a gratitude that felt rehearsed. I went to bed and lay next to her and measured my breathing against hers and remembered how, when we first started sleeping together, our breathing used to find a third rhythm between us, something neither of us had alone. Now I breathed like a man next to a very beautiful stranger he was responsible for keeping alive. The next morning I went to work and pretended to work and then did the thing I was made to do. Search. The phone bill gave me a pattern. The mysterious D had a number. I didn't call it. I Googled it. It looked like a business line that forwarded to a cell. The company matched an event planning firm downtown. On their staff page was a man with a face designed for exiting rooms without paying the tip, late 30s. Good hair that wanted to look like it didn't try. A gaze that could be called kind by a person who wanted to be seduced by competence. His name was Dominic. D. I clicked through to his Instagram, which was public because people like Dominic believe the world wants to know when they are near a pool. He had arms like a gym membership and a jaw that did push-ups, and in half a dozen photos I saw the top of Elena's head photographed from behind in a way that made me understand I was looking at scenery he thought he owned. I didn't want to fight with a man with a jaw like that. I wanted his absence. You cannot fight a man like him. You can only remove the parts of the world that let him function as an option. People like Dominic live on networks. I started searching cross-link tags. I found his boss. I found the clients he boasted about. I found the firm's code of conduct on an investor page that said employees were prohibited from relationships with clients that could present a conflict of interest or expose the company to liability. I found Elena's emails in a folder on our home laptop she never used. Because once you believe someone is yours, you forget to hide the door to the closet in a house you both bought. There were emails there to Dominic from her work address scheduling a meeting at his firm for a fundraising gala. Time-stamped a month before the diagnosis. Photos of initial walkthroughs. A subject line that said, "Later, when we have time." I kept my hands steady and took screenshots and put them in a folder I named After. There is a kind of anger that wants to scream. There is a kind that wants to build. I chose the latter because I wanted the outcome to be more than me crying in a living room. I began the quiet part of the plan, disentangling and documenting. I made copies of everything I owned before we were married: deeds, account statements, a list of assets that were legally mine. I had never drawn hard lines before because marriage is supposed to be the line that makes all other lines negotiable. Now I drew lines with a ruler. I reviewed our insurance designations and remembered the policy I had set up in my early 20s naming my sister as beneficiary. I confirmed it was still that way. I checked the policies where Elena had named me and weighed the mathematics of changing anything while she was in treatment. I did nothing yet because the optics would matter later. I created a living trust for my premarital assets with a lawyer recommended by a friend who doesn't ask why, only when. I shifted what I could into places that wouldn't be part of a marital split. None of this was illegal. It was exactly the kind of planning people tell you to do in case of catastrophe. I just had a different catastrophe in mind. I also learned. I learned the words marital misconduct are sharp in some states and dull in others. I learned what an alienation of affection suit looks like and where it is still a thing. I learned that Elena's nonprofit had a strict fraternization policy because donors can smell scandal even when the recipients of their charity cannot afford cologne. I learned that you can be a saint and still do the next right thing while holding a knife behind your back if the person you are doing it for is using your blood to paint hearts on other people's hotel sheets. Chemo went on. The calendar turned to the month after where everything started. Elena grew thinner. I stayed useful. I counted pills. I made her laugh sometimes quietly because the body needs sound. We watched movies where nothing dangerous happens beyond a broken appliance. I kissed her forehead and pulled blankets up to her chin and left the room to breathe when the air got too crowded with silence. On a Tuesday when rain made the city remember it had gutters, I did what had to be done. I sat down across from her, set my phone face down on the table to make a point and said, "I know." She didn't defend first. She asked, very softly, "What do you think you know?" I told her enough that she could see the shape of my knowledge. A hotel. A name. A series of texts that read like scene directions for a life I wasn't cast in. She closed her eyes and touched her mouth with her fingertips. In that moment, if she had said anything that sounded like a truth with consequences attached, I did this. I started before the diagnosis. I should have told you the day I learned I was sick. Some part of me would have cracked along a line that still led to forgiveness. She didn't. She said, "It was complicated. I needed to feel, not this. He was there. It's not what you think." I heard the word needed like a sentence. "When?" I asked. "Before or after?" She answered too quickly. "After." The emails in the folder named After were dated a month before the doctor's call. I didn't show them to her then. I didn't want truth from her anymore. I wanted process. "I'm going to make sure you get the care you need," I said. "I'm going to keep the promises I made. But we are not a we in the way we were. When this is over, when your treatment is finished, we will separate. I won't set you on fire while you're in the water. But I will not stand outside holding a towel and pretend I'm not also watching what you're doing with the matches." She cried then in a way that made me feel like I'd pushed a person already on a cliff. I did not comfort her. I did not touch her hand. I have always believed tears are private unless invited. I walked to the sink and ran water and rinsed a cup we had both drunk from 1,000 times and thought about the bacteria we had shared and how none of it mattered to molecules. She asked me to forgive her, using the word like a key she believed would still fit the lock. I told her I would decide later. She asked me if I was going to tell anyone. I told her the truth. I will tell the people who need to know in order for the right things to happen. She asked me not to tell her mother. I did not answer, which is the softest form of no. People fantasize about dramatic confrontations. Mine happened in small rooms with fluorescent lighting and bad chairs. I met with a family lawyer and explained, in sentences that kept emotion out the way you keep water out of a server room, that I needed to protect premarital assets and arrange a separation that did not make me the villain to a judge. The lawyer nodded and told me the steps, and I did them. A postnuptial agreement signed gently, giving her reassurance and also making clear what the division would be. She signed it because she needed me, and I was careful to not be cruel when I presented it. I said the words, "This will make things simpler later." She glanced at it like a person glances at a document they believe will never matter because the universe is going to swerve back onto their street eventually. She mailed it without reading it twice. I collected proof. I kept a ledger of every payment I made for her treatment. Not because I planned to ask for it back, but because documentation is a map and maps help you explain what happened to a judge when memory becomes theater. I kept the text where she wrote, "I love you," and "I'm so sorry," and also sent messages to D that used exclamation marks in places I had never earned. I found the hotel charge on our joint card and paid it without flinching, because letting a single late fee mar my credit in the name of a point would be the kind of own goal that makes men look pathetic in retrospect. Then I took the part of the revenge that could have been ugly and made it clean. I told the truth to exactly the people who needed to hear it for the structure to shift. I called Elena's mother and told her we were having problems. I didn't say the word affair. I said, "She is not being honest with me, and I am doing my best to be honest with her." Elena's mother cried and asked what she could do, as if daughters were a set of instructions. I said she could be present. That was enough. I called my sister and told her everything. She said, "Do you want me to come get you?" Like we were kids again. I said no, because you can't run away from a house you still pay for and sleep in half the night. Then I sent a single email to Dominic's boss. I did not send screenshots. I did not slander. I wrote, "To whom it may concern, my wife, an employee of nonprofit, appears to have engaged in a personal relationship with your staff member while working with your firm on a fundraising event. Dates. I wanted to make you aware, given your publicly posted policy on conflicts of interest and fraternization. I do not wish to escalate this, but I believe it is relevant to your risk management." I sent a copy of the email to the anonymous tip line on his firm's investor page. I closed my laptop and went for a walk and watched how the light hit the sidewalk and realized there's a kind of brightness you don't notice until you're full of rage. Like the world trying to keep you from becoming too cold to join it later. Elena found out a week later when Dominic called her, hysterical in that masculine way where the voice goes high because a job is a man's North Star, and said someone had reported them. He begged her to say it wasn't true. She looked at me across the kitchen like any of this could still be negotiated. I didn't look back. She told him, "I can't talk," and hung up. And then she came to the table and said she couldn't believe I would hurt her while she was sick. I told her, "I didn't send any lies. I sent the truth to people whose job it is to evaluate behavior." She said I was cruel. I said, "I'm careful. It didn't happen immediately. Companies do not rush toward liability. They sidestep it." But within a month, Dominic was no longer with the firm. Turned out his boss liked to keep things clean, and investors liked it cleaner. Elena kept checking his Instagram like a person checks a bruise. The post slowed, then stopped. She began to text him, and he began to reply in single words. Then not at all. She sat in the living room in a hoodie with the hood up and stared at the TV like it owed her a line. I did not comfort her. I made her dinner and set it down and ate my own in the kitchen. Concurrently, I handled the public part one wanted, exposure without spectacle. I didn't post anything. I didn't tell friends in group chats. I did something quieter and stronger. I called Elena's executive director, her boss, and requested a meeting. I brought a copy of their policy. I said, "I am not here to cost Elena her job. Her job helps pay for her care. I'm here to put you on notice that there are circumstances that could reflect on your organization if they become public. You have documented policies. Enforce them as you see fit. I will not be your policeman." The ED, a woman with lines around her mouth, that said she'd seen 1,000 versions of this story and wished people came with simpler settings, nodded. HR followed up. She asked if I remembered what she had been wearing. I did. It didn't matter. The person who had worn that dress had died the day she thought she needed what Dominic offered. The person in the bed was a stranger who remembered me as a man with clean hands and a calm voice. She asked for forgiveness again. I told her I hoped she forgave herself for being small. She flinched at that, because smallness was the one charge she couldn't bear. She had always needed to be big in the eyes of the room, even if the bigness was made of borrowed light. She reached for my hand again. I let her have it for a minute, maybe two. It was not cinematic. There were no violins. There was a machine doing a thing machines do, and a woman with a mouth that had fewer words left in it, and a man with a heart that had learned to ration. The night she died, I was not there. Her mother was. Elena had told me that day that she was tired and wanted to sleep alone. I believed her. I went home to my new apartment and made tea and sat in the dark with the cup in my hands, because sometimes heat is the only proof you can get that you're still a mammal and not an object. The phone rang at 2:17 a.m. Her mother's voice made the sound people's voices make when they have run out of the ways grief disguises itself and decide to just show up naked. I drove over. The room was quiet. Elena looked like a person who had finally completed an assignment she resented. I stood by the bed and told the air 3 things. Thank you for letting me love her. I hate what she did to me. I hope her pain is over. Felt like talking to the inside of a coffin. Felt like pulling a needle out of my own arm. The aftermath belongs to administrators. Death certificates, leases, storage unit keys, the distribution of jewelry that had memories attached to fingers other than mine. I did not speak at her memorial. People came to me and said things that might have comforted other versions of me. She adored you. She was so brave. She never stopped talking about how you saved her life. I nodded at each sentence like it was a box to carry to a car. I went home and made a list of her passwords to close her accounts, and when I typed Dominic's name into the search bar to see if he had memorialized her with some performance, I found nothing. His Instagram had been private for weeks. Men like him do not memorialize anything but their own image. People will say I left her with nothing. That's not true. I left her with an apartment, a lump sum, a job as long as she could keep it, a mother who loved her, a sister who tried. I left her with me until it wasn't my place to be there. What she lost, Dominic? The job's reputation. The friends who valued her only inside the temperature where gossip shouldn't steam is what you lose when the accounts you keep about yourself are closed by the bank of reality. She died at the end of all that, yes. The cancer won. It often does. But she died facing what she had done, not while being applauded for a forgiveness she hadn't earned. That was my revenge. Not to kill her disease took that job for itself, but to make sure she looked at a mirror she could not tilt to a flattering angle before she left. There is a pettiness to revenge that I do not deny. There is also a justice to it that the polite world finds distasteful because it implicates us all. I never published her story on the internet. I never sent those screenshots to her donors, her friends, her extended family. I didn't torch her memory. I didn't need to. I built a structure that protected me and exposed the choices she made to the parts of the world that write policies so people's job titles don't become shields. I removed the cushions the affair had depended on: money, reputation, a mattress of enabling. I watched her land on the floor of consequences like a person sobering up. If that sounds cruel, understand how close I came to making different choices. There were nights where I held my phone like a weapon. There were mornings where the thought of ruining her public life felt like the only air available. I didn't do it. I think that matters more than the people eager to judge me will admit. After the funeral, after the casseroles, after the aunt who thought she could heal me by talking louder ran out of words, after her mother's eyes looked at me like I had abandoned a sinking ship and forgotten to shout "man overboard," after my sister stopped calling every night at 9 to ask if I had eaten, I did something boring. I returned to lists that weren't about revenge. I unpacked boxes. I built a desk. I reseasoned a cast iron pan because food tastes different when you think you might care again. I called my therapist and said, I did what I had to do. And she said, and now you have to sit with it. Sitting with it looks like mornings where the light through the blinds feels like a mercy and afternoons where it feels like an interrogation lamp. It looks like me walking past a boutique hotel without flinching and me walking past the cancer center and having to sit down on a bench because my knees forgot how to be knees. It looks like me not hating myself when I imagine the night she died and I wasn't there and hearing a voice that's part mine, part every priest I've ever accidentally listened to at a wedding, say, you were there long enough. It looks like me changing her contact in my phone from a name to a single letter and then deleting it 6 months later because grief didn't need a shortcut anymore. I have thought about what I would say if Dominic ever reached out. He won't. But if he did, I wouldn't offer him speeches. I would send him 2 lines. You were a symptom. She was the disease in our marriage. I cured it by leaving. The thing about men like him is that they need a main character to look at while they rehearse their role. I refuse to be his line reader. I have also thought about whether I loved Elena at the end. Love is a verb, not a statue. I did the verbs. I took her to chemo. Cooked. I filled pill boxes. I argued with machines. I stood in rooms where language goes to die and spoke for her when her mouth couldn't. That is love's skeletal system. The muscle, the thing that moves you to press your face into a person's neck because you cannot help yourself, atrophied the day I saw her dot on a hotel map. I don't punish myself for that anymore. You cannot grow muscle in a cast. If you came here for a moral, I can give you only this. If you ever find yourself building a revenge, build it with walls you can live inside after the ashes settle. Don't let your anger install doors you'll be ashamed to open later. Protect what is yours. Tell the necessary truth to the people with enforcement power. Starve the parts of the story that feed on spectacle. Leave the rest to gravity. Because gravity wins, and if you respect it, sometimes it drops exactly the right things. There's a bowl on my kitchen counter that used to sit on our old table. It's old clay, heavy, the color of a bruise softened by time. I keep fruit in it now, and sometimes keys, and sometimes my hand when I'm thinking. People bring me the small fruits of their own infidelities. It wasn't like what happened to you. We were already over. I just needed to feel wanted once, and I don't hold court. I don't hand out sentences. I tell them two truths. Devotion is a renewable resource, but it has a rate limit, and your body will tell you when the rate has been exceeded. Pay attention to that. Plan like a person who respects both love and the law. On a Sunday, a year after Elena died, I drove by the hospital and didn't go in. I went home and baked bread and opened the window and let the smell own the room. There was a text from my sister. She had found the diner receipt from our courthouse wedding in a box of old photos. "Do you want it?" she asked. I told her to keep it. It belonged to the version of me who believed pancakes could protect a vow from catastrophe. That man deserved better than the ending he got. I do not believe in cosmic justice. I believe in what I built with what I had left. If Elena were here to argue, she would say I punished her beyond the sentence the disease imposed. She would say I took everything that made life feel like a life and wrestled it away from her hands when she was weakest. I would tell her I left her with a bed and a mother and dignity enough to look at herself. Dignity is not the same as comfort. Sometimes it is the opposite. I would tell her I would do it again. Then I would leave the room before either of us mistook the conversation for a beginning. I didn't choose revenge the way some men choose a sport. I built it like a house I would have to live in after the storm. The roof holds. The walls do not rattle when the wind hits from the hospital side of town. There's a chair by a window where the light is better than it used to be, and when I sit there in the evening, I can almost hear the sound I wanted at the beginning. A quiet that doesn't need to be defended every second. A quiet that knows it earned its existence. If you want a number for closure, there isn't one. If you want a blessing, here, may you never have to do what I did. If you do, may you do it without becoming the thing you detest. May your hands stay steady. May your lists outlast your anger. May the last thing the person who harmed you sees be themselves, clearly, in a mirror you didn't tilt. Then step away. Let gravity do what it does. And go home.